happening around NDI. Yeah, it's going to be great. It's going to be amazing. So it's travesty.
Then you wake up from the cold sweat and get back to sanity.
It's nice to have dreams.
Have you considered analog video, Alex? Analog video.
I think it's all about 2
You
inch.
should hear Grunt's mention about videotapes.
2-inch tape. 2-inch.
I remember
Pinball.
a couple of years back at IBC, there was
Pinball.
this Synergy booth, and the guys were like, "Oh, IP will replace everything, and NDI will be the do everything." And I was like, maybe not.
In all fairness, that's what everybody said about chip cameras toward the end of the tube era. They said the exact same thing.
Well, I think that we are going to get back to Ethernet, but just not necessarily to. I don't think NDI will necessarily be that solution. All right, hey everybody, welcome to Office Hours. If you're here on YouTube and you see a little link down below, you can actually join the Zoom conversation or sign up for Zoom. You don't have to do it. You can just go sign up, and then we'll send you little emails. Not too many, just once a day, and we'll tell you what's going on. And so if you are here as an attendee and you're wondering how all these people became panelists, they got here early. And we start at 5 a.m. We start hanging out at 5 a.m., just a handful of us, and start chit-chatting. You got to remember that this is a global community, so it's not 5 a.m. everywhere. It's the evening or the night, or depending on where people are. And so the congregation begin, congression, people pulling together. That's the wrong word, but the kind of pulls together at 5 o'clock. And at 6 o'clock we start our webinar, and that's when we all start kind of putting things together. And then at 6:40, 6:43, we do the mic checks. Once we do the mic checks, we're not going to bring anybody else into the thing. So if you want to be part of the panel, and we would love to have you, we have centuries of experience here between all the folks that are here talking about this stuff. It's a great place to learn. And if you have something to offer, it's a great place to contribute to the rest of the community. So we would love to have you. So definitely the best time to jump in to test your kit to make sure that you feel comfortable is between 6 and 6:30. At that point you can jump in and say, hey, can everyone look at my kit? Am I ready to be on the panel? And we'll mostly just say yes, but we'll, give you tips if you want them. So 6 to 6:30 is a good time to do that. And then at 7, of course, we have open discussion. So 7 to 8 is always an open forum for us to talk through those things. At 8 o'clock, we have something that we're going to talk about. So, and so today we're going to talk about HDR, very practical discussion about HDR, not theoretical, but really like what it means in the industry. We'll talk about the theory of HDR, but we're going to talk about where the rubber meets the road and what it means for people. Tomorrow we'll talk about mixers. And we've been kind of moving through the chain of audio, and we'll talk about mixers. Wednesday we have a special. We're going to interrupt our video stuff for a video-related product announcement. So we're going to talk about that. That's going to help some of us with our workflows. So we're going to talk through that. Thursday, we're going to talk about audience interaction. So how do we pull audiences in, whether it's music or last week we talked about concerts, but this one was just going to be more about how do we include the audience in our shows. And then on Friday, we're talking about Zoom OSC, which is how to turbocharge your Zoom session. And we're actually going to have the founder of Zoom OSC here. So to answer your questions. And then on Saturday, of course, it's focus on education. So that's what we got coming up this week. And if you are interested in sharing this, do not share your own link that you use to get in here. People will come in as you. Share the link that I just put into Makana. Bill, do we got a couple questions?
We have more than a couple. We have 12 or 13, and they look real good. So here's the first one. We're starting out with Jeffrey Reyes of the Bronx.
I would like to say I'm noticing that there's more votes on the questions, which makes it easier for us. So if you're not asking questions, get up there and vote on the questions that you want to see first, because we spend a little bit more time on the front end than we do on the back end. So it's easier for us if you vote those questions up. Anyway, go ahead.
It's from Jeffrey Braze. And Alex, if you were just starting out between Davinci and Final Cut, which would you learn first? I plan on learning both, but usually with software, the first one you learn is the one you get used to, and it shapes your preferences going forward.
I'd probably still learn Final Cut. You'll get more work done faster in Final Cut than you will in Resolve. So as far as storytelling and process and just getting things done, I think that Final Cut's probably the first one I would learn. I'm using Resolve specifically for pretty heavy lifting that I don't think that Final Cut really has the feature set for. But otherwise, I think that Final Cut is still pretty great app. Bill, and then Jason.
So the thing that I would agree with that, but only in this respect. Final Cut changed the way I thought about editing in a lot of ways, but the most powerful of which was it is steeped in the idea of managing metadata as you go through your edit. So the whole browser at the beginning, the fact that it imports a lot of attached metadata with files, that it has a whole browser area where you do nothing but keyword things, and keywords is applying metadata. Those steps, when you learn how 10 work, are some of the magic sauce that has caused for me projects that took 2 days to edit to turn down into 2 hours to edit. But you have to understand that process. So you really do have to rethink how you do.
And again, I'm talking about
structure.
If someone says they're starting, if they're, if you're already a heavy Premiere user or Avid user looking for the next thing you're going to do, you might be more comfortable with Resolve at that point, because it's not that that Final Cut is harder to use. It's actually, in my opinion, easier to use. But it's kind of like when I moved from After Effects to Shake. So I was using After Effects for a decade before I started using Shake. I couldn't figure out how to import anything. I couldn't figure out how to export. I couldn't understand this whole, it was just really frustrating. Now, once I got used to it, then After Effects seemed like, oh my gosh, I'm contained by all these layers. There's how do you do a visual effects shot when you don't have layers? When you have all these layers, you have to be able to have it opened, area. So it's just a matter of getting your head around it. I found that here's the funny thing. The folks that learn Shake the fastest back then, 8-year-olds, 10-year-olds, you literally can tell. I'm going to tell you a story about a visual effects shot. It started here and then it went here, and then you tell these little branching stories. You bring them all back together, and the kids just pick it up right away, and they have no issue at all with putting together very advanced effects shots very, very fast, because they just don't have any reference point that tells them that it's hard. Jason, and then Stuart, and then Dave, and we'll move on.
I don't think anybody on this panel learned Resolve before they learned Final Cut. To that end, I do think that Final Cut, just like all Apple products, is designed around the 90-90 principle. What 90% of people need 90% of the time. And to that end, I still think it is the best under those circumstances.
Yeah, and it's going to continue to accelerate with the hardware. We should look at what USDZ means. Hopefully, we'll see Resolve support USDZ. USDZ is going to be really important as we move into AR. Stuart, and then Dave.
Yeah, I'm going to have a contrary opinion to a lot of people, no doubt. But a good editor is not limited by the software they use. A good editor is a good storyteller and can work on any editing platform. One thing and one advantage that Resolve's got over pretty much everything at the moment is it is complete cross-platform. It has versions for macOS, for Windows, and for Linux. So it doesn't matter what system you're running, you can still access the software to do the work. That's a significant advantage over FCP, even if just for sales, even though it's a free version to start with.
Yep. If you care, if for some Mac users, they don't care whether it's cross-platform ever,
Yes,
and
but that's Mac people as a whole.
I know. So if you have a
Mac
PC,
people as
you
a
can think
whole.
through it. But if you're a Mac person and you don't really care whether it's cross-platform, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was a Mac person for years and loved Final Cut. And when I finally broke down and had to switch to PC, Resolve was a godsend to me. And so I think learning on something cross-platform has some advantages, because you don't know when you're going to maybe have to jump ship when Apple's going to break something.
I think that. So I will say that until the M1 came out, I was assuming that at some point I was going to have to move the heavy lifting to PCs or Linux. I was kind of in this mode of, I don't know when it's going to happen, but I'm going to have to dump. The reason I'm so excited about the M1 and why we've already bought a bunch of them and everything else is that, man, as the first try, I'm like, yeah, I'm probably not going to have to go anywhere. And I still can't calculate. Leo was talking about it yesterday on Twit. There's no way to catch up. There's no way for for PCs and Linux to catch up. It's impossible. It's not, they can throw a bunch of cards in there and try to make it work, but without having an integrated chipset, and to do that, you have to own the code base, you have to own the operating system, you have to own it has to be like Krupp's Arms, kind of, for those of you who know what that is. But, when you get to that point, unless Apple gets broken up, it won't stop.
Alex, I'm going to have to argue that point.
Okay.
because right now, single-threaded operation, yes, the M1 is king,
Mm-hmm.
but multi-threaded operation, as used in NLEs, a Ryzen
Mm-hmm.
still kicks the M1's butt by multiple factors.
But by just coming out of the gate, it's not bad. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I
Not out
heard
of the
Leo
gates.
talk about that yesterday. It kind of got me
And we're going to move on
nudged
after this.
even.
Keep going.
What'd you
keep
say?
going. We're going to move on after
Okay.
Paul. I'm gonna keep
Okay,
moving.
so it kind of nudged me closer to getting an M1. I'm like right at the cusp of getting one right now. But for right now, Resolve is where my money is, because cross-platform, like Stuart said,
Mhm.
you know. But man, that thing that Leo said just really got me hyped up.
Mhm. Yep.
Big time.
I do think Resolve is an amazing package. Like, and we're using it more and more for a lot of heavy lifting. But if I was going to cut stuff fast, I still would drop probably back into Final Cut. Resolve, it's a big machine. You're setting things up to it. I don't find it to be a quick editor. Next question.
Moving on to A. Mitchells of Washington, and he asks, what are the recommendations for budget audio mixers with IP remote control, preferably with an app for that too, that have at least 4 XLR inputs? He'd like it to be sub $1,000 US, sub $500 US, or sub $200 US, those ranges. Thanks.
Grant and then Raphael.
Yeah, we've talked about it a lot, but the Behringer XR18, it's such a great unit. I'm using it now. It works really well. There's a Midas version which has slightly better mic pre's, and there's a really great app that I've noticed that even on the Behringer site now they're pointing to this app. It's called Mixing Station, and you pay just for it works on a few different brands of different models of audio mixers. But what's super cool about it is that you can completely customize the app yourself. You can change layouts. You can put different faders where you want them. You can put custom buttons wherever you want them. And so I use it now, and I really love it. You can make the faders super high as well on the iPad and the tablets. And so it kind of makes any of the audio mixers that you can use with this app, Mixing Station, it makes it like a whole new mixer because of what you can do with it.
Raphael and then Stuart.
I was gonna say the Behringer X32, which starts at about $800 for the rack version. As Grant said, it is controlled by an application, and this application is multi-platform, works on either Windows, Mac, or Linux.
Mm-hmm. Stuart and then Jeffrey.
Just the way the question's phrased, I actually read it as meaning budget audio mixers for use like on field recorders and that sort of stuff. So on that basis, like for working with the camera out in the field, I love Tascam, so take that as how serious this response is. A Zoom F8. It has all of those features.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey?
As for sub 200, I don't think you're going to find anything that is a major brand that will allow you to do any type of IP conversion. I do have the QSC line. It was mostly for bands and live music. It also works great for any type of conference room situation. Their TouchMix 8 is under the $1,000 mark. TouchMix 16 will cost a little bit more. And of course, the TouchMix 30, which it can allow you to hook up to a DAW, is a lot more than that. But it does have IP control. The only problem with it is it does not have a computer interface. You can't use Windows or Mac. You got to use iPad or Android devices.
Great. Next question.
Moving on to Eric Hall of Mount Vernon, Washington, who asked, why does GoTo Meeting crop my camera feed from the ATEM?
I'm sorry, GoTo Meeting. It's an old platform. Is it cropping it 4 to 3? Is that I don't know if that Eric is it cutting? Are you here? Eric was here. Did he drop out? No. So you have to let us know whether it's 4 to 3. It's because GoTo Meeting doesn't know how to deal with 16:9, because when it was created, everybody was in 4 to 3, and they had 4 to 3 aspect ratio presentation slides for GoTo Meeting, because that's what you do on GoTo Meeting. And GoTo Meeting is it's going to be one of the ones along with WebEx, and I think GoTo Meeting, WebEx, Chime, Connect. Those are all things that were out there first, but they don't have the bones to compete. Like they're not going to compete with Zoom, and I think we're in a 3-horse race between Zoom, Teams, and Meet. And I don't think there's anybody else that's going to really come into it, but it's just because they don't have it would take a lot to uncode what they have. They should, and maybe they'd stay relevant. They'll stay relevant to the extent that companies that use them still use them, but they're not growing their market at this point. So you want to think about where you would go next, in my opinion. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, in the most recent version, I think I've seen they've actually got a 16:9 option if you go searching through some of the menus.
Right.
But not everybody seems to get that.
Yeah. We dropped GoTo Meeting actually because of the trouble we had getting video to work with GoTo Meeting when we first needed it. It was just like this disaster. Like it would just blow up and it would do all these other things. And that's when we just kind of moved away from it. And they're just they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. Go ahead, Scott.
And in standards meetings, one of the first things we tell people is turn off your camera.
Yeah. And I used GoToMeeting for a decade, so it's not like I don't know it. It's just that, we just got that it wasn't going to make the turn. Next question.
Moving on, the next one comes from Hugo in Portugal, who asks, panel opinion on expensive hardware, rent, buy the most serviceable, repairable, or buy insurance?
I don't know if any of us fit into either of those, but
I'd say rent and buy insurance, not just one or the other.
Well, you have to. You can't really run this business without insurance. But go Grant.
I've changed a little bit in more recent times on some of this, because for events that I do, there has often been gear that I think I can buy this for the cost of one event, maybe 1.5 events type of thing. And I think, I want to do it. And then I start looking at a warehouse full of gear that I don't want to maintain, that I don't want to drag around everywhere, that I don't want to, have to get a truck to move it and all of that. And so I'm now at a point where if I can fit whatever I want into a carry-on, or I can, get it into a couple of carry-on cases and I can run a show with that, then sure, I'll own that gear. But if it's anything more than that, if it needs a truck, if it, it's a TV is a really good example, right? You get a 65-inch screen or something like that, and a hire company is going to charge you, Australian numbers might be, $600-700, and you just think, I can buy one for that, and you get all offended by it. And then you start thinking, but I don't have to lug it. I don't have to get a truck out. I don't have to do any of this stuff. And it's just going to work. And if it breaks, they're going to bring me another one, all of that stuff. And so that's kind of where I'm at now. It's small things I can carry on. That's what I want in my pack. Anything bigger than that, I'm going to hire it or rent it.
Dave? And then Stuart?
Yeah, I did buying for a big AV company for years. And our purchase criteria was, can we get access to it locally in the markets we're in? If we can, then we'd have to, be able to rent it pretty guaranteed 4 or 5 times a year to make it worth buying. Otherwise, we just rent it. And, but if we can't get it, if it's a weird widget piece or a glue piece, sometimes it's helpful to have a workbox full of those pieces that are just hard to find.
Stuart?
Buy things that nobody else has in your area so that you can rent it out to everybody else. But everything you rent in business is a tax deduction. So the more you rent, the more you can improve your books between what's in the red ledger and what's in the black ledger.
Brian and then Guy.
And one of the things that when you're talking about buying things that I am only very recently dealing with is also pay attention to, is this something that's going to actually hold its value? Or is this something that in 2 years they're going to come out with a new one and then no one will want the one that I have? If you have something, which is why lenses are a great purchase if you can swing the purchase, because generally they keep their value kind of forever. But, quite often, video switching and gear, we're going to be in 8K in 3.5 seconds. And then suddenly all your 4K stuff, you get the idea.
Guy?
Yeah, just make sure that if you're buying something, that you're going to use it 5-6 times a year. Otherwise, it's going to sit around. And so the benefit to buying, of course, is that you can learn it inside and out. And then when you're on a show, you know the intricacies and you know that it's been firmware updated. That's one of the other things to remember, is that a lot of the times that you're not using these things, the updates are coming out. And unless you're on top of things, you can get behind and then get burned on a show.
I'm surprised, Guy, that you're saying that people should buy things. I'm just really surprised.
For me, a lot of times I think about what's my how quickly can I pay it off? So do I have a job that pays this down quickly? Even if I make less money, let's say on this current job, most of my jobs will never cost more than the rental. What I buy will never be more than what I'm charging for gear rental or whatever for inside of the piece there. And usually it's an amalgamation of things that I own and things that I'm buying to, get ready for that job. The other thing I look at is I look at how people treat rented equipment, and I usually I try to keep it out of my core system. So I will rent equipment, but it usually won't be a core piece of equipment because I'm afraid that it won't be treated well. And I'm afraid, and there's things you can see. Things look like they got dropped off a truck, but there's a lot of things you can't see, like humidity and heat and things that happen to it before that make it unstable. And I've just, all over the world, I've dealt with rental equipment that doesn't work. So it's just one of those things that I think about a lot for really high profile events. We build almost all of our kits in the warehouse, or we did when I had a warehouse, but we're slowly building towards that again, where you pre-build everything, make sure it all works. And then when you go into the venue, and that saves you, especially if you're working in a union facility, not figuring things out on site saves you a lot of money. So when it comes in a little kit that just pops open, you can get pretty creative about sending one or two people in a union team around to set all these rooms up, rather than having a team for every room for that day. And that can be tens of thousands of dollars, of difference. So, that pays for things pretty quickly. It also just means that it's going to work when you get there. So there are certain things that I tend to rent all the time. Jibs. I used to own one, but I don't buy, because jibs almost always come with an operator. So if you own a jib, they're just mad. They have a jib and they know the jib, and they'll remind you about how their jib is better than your jib, and all that stuff. It's just easier to get the operator with the jib. And then there is lenses. I don't buy that. I did buy sets of lenses, but I don't buy them that often because generally, if they're working or not working pretty quickly, and it's a big expense, and you have to really know that you're going to use them. When I bought my lenses, I spent a couple $100,000 on some broadcast lenses, but I knew I was going to use them 5 or 6 times a month. And like in that flow, they paid themselves off relatively quickly. I also don't buy tripods. Generally, I have like a big tripod, but generally because the tripods that I like to use for shows are between $10,000 and $15,000 with the head, and so I don't want to pay for that. Those things cost me $100 to rent. So it doesn't $150 to rent it, or I can pay $10,000 or $15,000 to use it. I know to own it, and I can't figure out how that ROI comes back. Phil and then Bill, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, just a little bit different take on our rental versus purchase thing. If it's a premium product, what we often do is just look at, can we justify 20% of the price and then sell it immediately? If it's a premium product, it'll hold its value, and then we just get rid of it. And then, it's like we only have to justify, usually can even get 90% of the price back in the used market for like cameras and lenses and stuff like that.
Yep. Bill?
The other part of my consideration when I'm doing that is how complicated is the device or thing to learn. Nobody's going to rent a piano, learn to play the piano, because you have to have it there so that you can get back to it all the time, because it's a very complicated skill to operate it. A grip gear, it's not that complicated. Most of us could figure out how to work with any particular jib if we arrived on set and had to make it work, because it's pretty simple processes. So things that are more complex, that calculation shifts over to, I think I want to live with it, and NLE, you got to live with it so you know how it works. You can't really be in and out of it.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to John Preto of Los Angeles in the panel. And John asks, Alex, what do you think stalled Google Hangouts as a video platform? We've seen this over and over again in the past 20 years.
They gave up. I mean, they were putting a bunch of money in. I mean, I'm actually pretty close to this, so I'm not going to get too deep into the details, but they, I think that they were put in a position that was complex when there was a political back and forth over Google Plus, and Vic left, and they had to he left suddenly, and the Google had to make a decision very quickly, and when they made that decision, they had, it just precipitated everything that happened after that. But essentially, Google gives up quickly often, and so they gave up. They decided to, and a lot of this is always driven by a product manager. Had I become the product manager, it would have been a broadcast tool by now. Like, it would have been just something that this is how you bring. It would have been what people are using Zoom for, and Skype sometimes, but mostly Zoom now. I would have built it so that it gave you clean aperture and you could output everybody with ISOs, and like there was, there'd be a whole, but they chose, I didn't apply for that job, but they picked a different product manager, and a different product manager decided to, let's rip everything out and make it really simple to use. And that was useful for the overall kind of thin client type approach, but it's now they're paying the price. They can't even do their own shows on it. Like it's, so so it's a lot of it. You think that it's a big company. It all comes down to like 2 or 3 people who are working on the product, making decisions about its overall direction, and arguably the people who took it over did not make the right decisions. In the long term, and the folks that were choosing Zoom, and mostly Zoom's direction did. So I think that's, and that sometimes you can't. I could have guessed it because I kept on telling them that this is where we could go. With this, we designed products and just sent them designs because we were doing tons and tons of work, and we just send designs of this is how you take over the world. Like this is how, like these boxes with this thing and this product, and this is what it has to have. And we wrote software into it using the API and controlled it. And we built edit systems for it that you couldn't buy. And so it had all the tools. When they pulled the API out, it just took everybody's ability to customize it out. And then after that, it wasn't going to happen. Jeffrey and then Paul.
Yeah, I'm really surprised that YouTube didn't take over the Hangout tool and just kind of build it into their system. But
there weren't that many people using 10. Like, what was interesting is that now we have, and I think it is actually the grid view, the gallery view that we have here is what has you do it. Has a lot of people, there are choices that people didn't even know that they were going to make. I don't think they knew how important it was. But one of the things that Zoom does that Google didn't was the grid view. This view that I watch all of you in. What Google had was something that went across the bottom. I know that seems like a minor thing, but the grid view means I can see everybody or I can see one person, and the ability to modally jump between those two things, I think has turned out to be a really magical thing that not a lot of other people have. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, but more to my point was the fact that Yahoo tried it and failed. HP tried it and failed. There's so many other companies that have had some sort of video conferencing service out there that have tried it and pretty much failed. Some because of patents, and some because of complexity. Some because we just didn't have the infrastructure at the time. Because we're talking like 10, 15 years ago. So yeah, it would have been nice to stick around because I started with Hangouts. I was in one of the beta groups, and it would have been nice. But as we move on, we find better and go from there.
Go ahead, Paul, real quick.
And it still works. I mean, I started out with Hangouts. Hangouts had its heyday, and I created a website called austinhangout.com.
Right.
You go there, you click one button, and we're talking back and forth.
Right.
So it still has a place.
It does.
And you can use it for somebody who doesn't want to use Zoom, who just wants a quick meeting. It works great.
But there's a lot of tools. Like that's a pretty commoditized market. There's Be Here, and there's a whole bunch of other ones that are there's a lot of things that you can just kind of click and turn on and have a WebRTC client pop up. And that's the problem that Google has. They don't really distinguish themselves anymore, other than being attached to the G Suite. Jason?
Well, and don't forget Cisco, which costs a fortune and mostly failed. Why do you think they failed? Is it just the straight up expense?
Infrastructure. Like, they built the infrastructure around something, and then the problem is so much infrastructure. I mean, the video quality on Cisco is horrible. You know, like it's just, and they're using just really old codecs. And the problem is those codecs are driven by hardware. So because Cisco sells hardware, so they're not able to be nimble because they built those into the chips. You know, and so they can't just replace everybody's equipment, and so they're stuck with these really, really old compression that are, you know, for the bandwidth, really nasty to watch, you know, to look at. I've had to do back ends on Cisco, and you're just like, what are they doing? You know, so that's the issue. Next question.
Moving on. Next up is Tony Adamopoulos of Missouri, and Tony asks, could you briefly describe the differences between audio hijack and loopback?
Go ahead, Jason.
Audio hijack is more of a linear process. So it's, you know, if you have a broadcast chain where you have an input, you want to do stuff with it, and then you want to do something, you know, you want to output it, you want to broadcast it, you want to record it. Loopback is designed to be a completely internal mixer. So think of it as your computer being looped back upon itself with a series of app-specific aux sends that allow you to manipulate it before it goes out anywhere.
Oh, you're muted, Alex.
You nailed it. So we'll keep going. We got a lot of questions. Go ahead. Next question.
Okay.
Oh, you want to say one more thing, Mickey? Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, like from my point of view, loopback is specifically for routing audio between apps, between interfaces, virtual interfaces, or actual physical interfaces. And audio hijack is more if you want to do some processing and possibly recording and streaming out of your computer.
This show is streamed to the web, to the Mukana app via audio hijack. So it's you know, and
from
all the
this
effects and
computer
everything else.
over
Yeah, from
there.
that computer, from the
Wait,
computer right behind us.
Cutting?
Exactly.
It's not cutting. Why?
Coming to you out of the Philippines today.
There he is. Live from from the Philippines. All right, next question.
Moving on to John M. Gerard in Berkeley, and John asks, what do you think about OBS Ninja? Leo Laporte is switching over from Skype.
He hasn't switched yet. All I'll say is I saw it last night. Still on Skype. So so I think it'll take a little time. I think that they're probably working through some of the bits and pieces of that. But we've seen a lot of people be really successful with it. I wouldn't use Skype anymore at all. I think the Zoom rooms is the best, you know, bringing people in that you can get. But I think it's a better solution. I don't think Leo likes Zoom, but Jason.
Along those lines, I mean, Leo has a fair bit of hardware invested directly into the way that he makes Skype work. Do you think that he could make Zoom work just as easily?
Yeah, totally. Or Ninja, because it's a different computer for each participant. So in that sense, we've done events where we have people coming in over Teams, over WebEx, over Zoom, all in the same event, because we have one computer for every participant. Whatever that computer is interfacing with, it doesn't matter. We just need to know that we can get audio in and audio out, and video in and video out, and that's it. So if you have different machines, that's one of the big advantages of just throwing hardware at the problem is you're not platform specific. I could use Vmix in one of them if I wanted to. Go ahead, Paul, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, can you use audio hijack to port like YouTube video or this video to Discord? Will that work?
If you wanted to, I don't know what you would, but yeah, it'd probably work.
If you're going to Discord video, yeah, probably. But you would use loopback, I think, for that. You'd be routing that out. Next question.
Next question comes to us from George Seedy. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. I'm sorry, from St. Louis. And George asks, he's arranging hardware placement in a home recording studio. Is it okay to use USB extensions and or USB hubs to reach an iMac from a Scarlet 18i8?
No.
It depends on how far and what devices you're using. So with a regular cable, I would say no more than 10 feet, a 10-foot cable, and that's not really an extension. But the attenuation becomes pretty intense after that. For longer runs, I think, I can't remember who makes them that we make. It's either Belkin or Geffen or someone makes these USB extenders that we extend for hundreds of feet, and they're over Ethernet. And they're Ethernet cable, not
those are Balins.
Routers.
Those are different.
Yeah, so those are paired, and they're a couple $100 for a pair. So it's not like it's cheap, but we can put them anywhere, and we use them to do that. And then there's some higher end versions of that. Go ahead, they go over fiber, so you can take USB and put it over fiber if you want, and then that works great. But and you can go longest run I think we've done is about 1,500 feet for a USB connection. Mickey.
Yeah, I would try to avoid that if you can, but if you have to, I would trust a hub more than I would trust an extension cable.
Yeah, powered hub. Yeah, Raphael and then Jeffrey, and then we'll move on.
I found some devices that would forward USB over Ethernet and IP. So you can actually route the USB to wherever your machine is.
Yep, we've done that actually with Prompter, for the for our pickles, where we have them running the presentation software 1,000 miles away, and we just use the USB connection to put it back into that laptop. Jeffrey?
Yeah, the power issue would be the biggest thing. If you have a self-powered device, you definitely don't want to run a hub on it. But they are working on the fiber USB-C cables. Like for instance, for the Oculus 2, it has that cable that you can use, and that would probably be a little bit better in your data transfer. Of course, not your power transfer.
You can get fiber USB cables and FireWire cables, all kinds, or not FireWire, but Thunderbolt cables. They're really expensive, but they do go a long way, 30, 40 feet or 100 feet. Next question.
Philip Oler in Katona, New York says, bidding on producing a live corporate event, comms are one part that I'm not certain about. There will be 2 live locations with cameras and others offsite, including myself to switch the event, sending the stream to RTMP. Any way to use Zoom for comms, or is Unity the only way to go?
I would not say that I would use Unity. I would say that I would use Tucker. so like, if this is the first time you've done this and you're like, oh, I don't know, like there's a lot of us that build our own comms, and I have a ClearComm system that I really like a lot to tie all that stuff in, but I have Brian to manage that ClearComm system. Makes it easier for me. I don't know if I would like it if I was doing it myself. So Brian manages that ClearComm system, and it works really, really well inside of our system. But I was just on site somewhere where they didn't, they had some Dante stuff that we were using, and we had to tie in Unity. I called Tucker, and he had it in 30 minutes. Like 30 minutes, I had all my panels set up, everything all ready to go. Then he spent time figuring out how to get all the Dante stuff, and like the cost, I was like, I felt bad for him, I felt bad that that's all I was paying him. I was like, okay, if that's what you want to charge me, but so Tucker is in our group. You can find him in Discord. He's using Unity, but you don't want to figure out Unity on your first show. Like I'm just saying, like at some point in time, you can decide I'm going to use Unity, but don't try to figure it out. It's not that expensive to go to a specialist. And in our group, and actually anywhere I've ever met anybody, Tucker knows about as much about Unity as anybody I've worked with. And so, and I would just use him. Go ahead, Brian.
I agree 1,000%. Just one quick little note. There's a big difference between Zoom and a real comm system, and that is that in Zoom, you can't have 5 people talking at the same time and actually hear them. Right. And in a production environment, oftentimes you'll have 4 or 5 people kind of talking over each other, and you kind of need to be able to hear them all.
Well, and the other very quickly, you move into PLs and point-to-points. So PLs are the party line. That is, I'm going to set this group up. This is all my cameras. This is my production staff. So they're not all talking over each other. The cameras are talking to the cameras. The production folks are talking to the production folks. You might have one PL that is all of your presenters, and you might have another one. There's all kinds of things that you can break those PLs into. And then in addition to that, you want point-to-points. If I want to talk to Scott, or if I want to talk to Brian or Bill, I want to be able to push on something and just talk to them and not interrupt everybody else. As soon as your event starts to become a little bit more complex, you need to be able to not interrupt, because there's so much communication going by. Like when you get into comms and you work with teams that understand comms, there's an enormous amount of flow. I think I talked about it over the weekend or maybe last week that 50% of your show is comms, the other 50% is audio, and then the rest of it's just the show. Anyway, so Scott. Anyway, next question.
Moving along. Don't call Tucker, because then Tucker will never come back to the panel, and I miss him and his dog Charlie. Okay, that said, Mark Harder from Brooklyn is here saying, so being a Mac person, I finally tried NDI to send out OBS to Zoom. 3rd time I dove in, sync was lost. Now I see some people on office hours having sync issues and muttering NDI under their breath. Have you all quietly already given up on NDI?
Oh, a lot of people are using NDI here. It's go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Jason, and then Stuart.
Yeah, I use NDI in several different. I'm smaller, So I'm not doing higher end productions, but I have my PTZ camera on NDI, my overhead cameras on NDI. I do my graphics through NDI, and actually this is going out to Zoom on NDI. So the more important thing is what is OBS doing with NDI, and how are you setting up your NDI to work, not having to be reliant on the network. You're using static IP addresses. Are you using high-end cables? What are you using for your system? Do you have any wireless on your NDI? That's going to be a big kicker right there, because if it's like a ping pong ball race, you're throwing out ping pong balls all over the place, and you're trying to grab one of them, that being the wireless one, that can cause problems throughout the whole network.
Yep. Jason, and then Stuart.
For the record, I have never believed in NDI, not because I don't want it to work, but because I can't trust it not to fail, which is a double negative, but it makes sense in this context. Yeah, I use it. It's fun, but for anything in production, it's all hardware.
Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, I've had plenty of practical experience with both NDI and NDI HX. There's a huge difference. NDI uses a massive amount of bandwidth and is reasonably reliable on an intranet. NDI HX should never, ever, ever be used. And like Jeffrey said, NDI over Wi-Fi is an absolute no-no as well. But I've had no problems using it on OBS and Vmix on Mac and PC.
Paul, and then Mickey.
Yeah, I'm using NDI. Let me grab my camera here. See, I've got NDI, 3 NDIs here,
yep.
And I've got an NDI up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a disastrous run with NDI for a while, but now I'm taking another run at it. But after what Stuart said, I don't know. Stuart's not recommending it.
Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I just want to remind everyone, NDI is not a plug and play solution. Read the white papers. Read the white papers, RTF. If I'm allowed to say that.
Next
you didn't put the M on the end. So yeah. Stuart Fairweather of Melbourne, Australia, and right here on the panel says, speaking of expensive kits sent out to interviewees, what are people's preferences for shippers? Australia Post, insert expletive that is very bad, 7 days from Sydney to Melbourne. UPS 5 days from the US West Coast to Melbourne. Is shipping insurance worth it too? So those of you shipping globally, who's got good solutions?
From Africa and to and from Africa, we use DHL. To most of the world, if we go out, if it leaves the country, we use Rocket. It's not the cheapest solution, but it always gets there. I have had a truck full of gear arrive 3 minutes early to a declared time in Davos in the middle of a snowstorm. Like Rocket will show up on time every time. If they give you a time, they'll be there. It's expensive, but they also manage all the carnets and all the things you need to do to get in and out of the country. So it's not, there's a lot that comes with it, and I don't think there's any equivalent, in my opinion, to that. In the US, we mostly use FedEx, mostly because there's, the tracking is better, although they have lost my stuff. What we've learned is you have to have a FedEx account and you have to use it. You can't just use your FedEx number. You need to go into the account and generate the slip so that you can track it all correctly. If you fill out the form and they lose your drives, not that that's happened to me recently, not that I'm bitter, they have no way to find it. It's just gone, into the ether. And so, anyway, I do use, when I use FedEx, I use the insurance because it's really cheap, like $1,500 of insurance. Those drives that I lost, I get all the money back for them because they'll because I paid for the insurance. It's like $1 every $100 or something like that, or it's something relatively low. It's worth throwing. It's worth doing. I don't really use USPS. I just haven't for most of my life. And then I don't really use UPS, and it's mostly the drop-off process in UPS is harder for us. And so I think that it's good if you're a company that you have a shipping place to go in and out of. If you've got a dock, UPS is probably good. But if you're an individual that needs to go to a location and drop something off or have someone, then I find FedEx to be easier. That's how I approach it. Go ahead, Stephen.
DHL for sure, especially if you aren't shipping truckloads. But if you're shipping like 6 Pelican cases anywhere in Europe, they magically appear faster than you can get there on an airplane. So I don't know how they do that.
We've had a couple of times where they dropped them off. DHL's dropped things off in the wrong, city, like in Germany. Like, fortunately, it's Germany, so it just sits there waiting quietly in nice stacks until we send someone to pick it up. But it was like the whole set, Paul.
Yeah, I use UPS in Austin because I'm in a condo with a concierge at a dock, and they handle it all. But out here in the country, never use UPS because they can't find me, and it's very unreliable.
Also, there's same-day services in the United States from Southwest and from United. They're very hard to get now, so it takes months for you to get registered for them. But when you have it, it's kind of magical. Like, you need to get something to Washington, D.C. from San Francisco, and you can drop it off at 7 a.m. in Washington, D.C. and have it there at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in San Francisco, or at 4 o'clock. I'm sorry, from San Francisco to D.C., they'll put it in cargo. It's a United cargo service, and we have used it. We don't use it all the time, but when you need it, to get something over in the same day. Southwest does the same thing. It's a big part of their business, actually, is filling the excess of their planes with people's shipments. And they do a lot of different cargo, but you can get in on it, but it takes tons of background checks and lots of paperwork. And, they're afraid you're going to send the wrong things. And so it takes 6 months, typically. It took us 6 months to get into the program. But once you're in the program, it's that ripcord of, I need something over there right now that has saved projects. Dave, and then Bill, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, Delta has something called Delta Dash, similar to the Southwest program. Yep. And if you don't have time to wait 6 months, there's a company called Forward Air, and they are sort of like Rocket. They'll take it and put it on an airplane with their account.
Yep. And Bill?
Yeah, I think in Southwest it's called counter to counter, and it's the same kind of thing, but you do have to be known to them.
Yep. Yeah. And it's worth researching it. We'll do a whole hour on shipping because there's a whole hour to cover shipping and carnets and process and landing. And next question.
Paul King is up next from Northern Virginia, and he says, how y'all making virtual galas, or is it galas, the big parties, I assume, worth tuning into? Interested in hearing how people are combating people's apathy towards all things virtual these days.
Paul?
Yeah, they have a great one here in Austin. It's called the Internet Marketing Party. And no, it's not full of tech geniuses like this show, but it's great. It's fun. They have fun. They keep the conversation going. They've got a time clock. Technically, it's a disaster, but the fun they have makes up for it.
I think the one thing that we found has not been super exciting is when people want to do a bunch of playouts. Playouts, people aren't that excited about it. As soon as you do a lot of like pre-packaged playouts and you stack them one after the other, you're like, I think we got away with that for the first part of COVID, and now people are like, I don't really want to watch that. So finding ways to get live interaction, live conversation, that type of thing has become really more and more important. Phil?
Yeah, we've been actually doing quite a number, surprisingly, of virtual galas. And what Alex just said, the death knell is playouts, and the trick is, just like in a real world gala, is giving people an experience that they might not otherwise be able to have, and that they'd be willing to sort of justify forking over some money for. So if you can get a celebrity in a room and give them a chance to talk with them or mingle with them, and having sort of a behind the scenes conversation that they might not otherwise be privy to, any sorts of sort of exclusive, shoulder rubbing is valuable to folks. And if you can make that work in Zoom, that's a good formula.
We've had a growing number of them that we are using things like breakout rooms, and and I've really gotten my head around it a lot more talking to Grant about it, and then just really thinking about how we use them. And we've used them for a bunch of our events, and it's really compelling. Like when when you can break people out and have them all do their thing and then come back together, and it's why we're experimenting with it more here. But it was kind of a foreign thing for me for a little while, and now it's kind of a key piece of the puzzle, of making that work. And I think that that's but letting people mingle to Phil's with each other, and that's what's missing is this. We have a general conversation, and you want people to be able to mingle with each other and network, as well as be able to talk to specific VIPs or other things like that. One of the things that we're working on for something in the near future is, having all the speakers have their own room. So the speakers are all going to go up, but then when we do the breakout, all the people that just spoke will have their own breakout room that is named them, and you can go in and talk to them. And it's reproducing that, like the group of people that wrapped around a speaker at the end of the show. You can do that. And the thing that we learned from that I learned from TED, I was at TED Africa in 2007, was not a lot of presentations. So you think that you look at TED, you think it's solid presentations. 3 presentations, and then there's like an hour and a half to mingle, and then there's 3 more presentations and another hour and a half to mingle. TED is all about the conversation, not the talks create context for the conversation. It's like, but the conversation is what really TED is about, and it took me a long time to get my head around that. But so building out the temptations, people want 6 hours of either pre-roll or a rollout or a playouts, or 6 hours of presentations. And what the attendees really want, whether they know it or not, is a little bit of talking and then a lot of them conversing. And that's what's missing, I think, that we had in the physical world that we tends to get wrung out of virtual events. Next question.
Moving on to join us, Totel of Reutlingen, who asks, I'm in the process of building a community around my product on Discord. With 400 people on the server, should I do streams or a panel like this to share information?
I'm a big fan of a panel like this, says Stuart. A little audio issue here. Run out of time, Stuart. We got to go.
No, we're having a mouse issue because I need to replace a mouse pad.
Yeah.
Simple question for Jonas. Do you want to sell things? Because if the customers can ask questions, you will sell more things to them. Because you're asking about a product on Discord. Do you want to be able to sell that product and get that product out there? Let the customers ask questions and you'll improve the product there. The same way our feedback from this panel ends up improving Zoom.
Right. Yep. Jeffrey, real quick. We're running out of time.
Yeah, my question is more of who are these 400 people? Are they going to be people like us? Are they going to be people like somebody coming from their $50 smartphone trying to connect up? Because that would be a big determining factor. You'll have a lot of problems if you have that latter fact. They don't know how to mute. They don't know how to do different things. That might be too much of a learning curve.
The main thing is that whatever you do as if you're starting your own product, you have to educate your users. The value that they have in your product is going to be how they know how to use it. And the example I use 1,000 times is my microwave they spent millions of dollars on tons of features in my microwave, and I know how to use power and time, and mostly just power, and it's because they don't build training for it. If there was a cool video that showed you how to make a new meal and then it was everything else, and it was easy on my phone, and there was a form, I'd probably use my microwave. I don't know if I would use it, but I think there's people that would get into it, especially right when they bought it. You have this moment where they're trying to figure it out. And if they get good at it, they also tell their friends that it's great. People knowing it means that there's a network effect there. Next question.
Our friend Guy Cochran here in the panel has a specific question for Brian Maddox. Can you share with us an example of when you've seen better real-time conversations because of lower latency audio, which allowed for faster transmission?
I wish I could have a great behind the scenes story with lots of name drops, but I don't have anything quite as delicious as that. It's just a generalized observation, and I've just noticed that, and it makes intuitive sense. It's, if there's a 400 millisecond turnaround between the conversation between two people, then inherently there's your reaction, and especially when both people are on the screen at the same time. So when you've got a 2-shot and one person's talking and the other person is reacting, when there's a 400 millisecond turnaround, 500 millisecond turnaround, which is not atypical for a video call, there's this strange thing that happens where they say something and the person reacts slightly slower, and then they finish their phrase, and then the other person responds. And it's that little tiny gap that if you can speed up the audio, getting back and forth between those two people and get it down to 50 milliseconds or 80 milliseconds, which is completely doable in the audio realm, it makes the whole conversation flow in a way that is just much more natural. It's just much more natural.
And I would say that when you're at a party, someone's response time at that party, the difference between someone who is, you know, a really good conversationalist and really funny in life of the party and someone who isn't is often measured in about 100 to 200 milliseconds about how they react to what you're saying. Like when they sit there and pause, there's some people that do that. They pause and they think about it. But the person that's having that conversation, when it's really going back and forth with your friends, that comfort level is hundreds of milliseconds, like 100 to 200 milliseconds of time. When they're reacting really fast, when they're fast on their feet talking, that is a function of that speed. And when people slow that down, it slows down the conversation, which is not a bad thing, but you just want to be conscious that really it's measured in very, very small increments of time that has us feel energy inside of a conversation. Jason and then Jeff, and then we'll move on. Try to keep it quick. We're going to run out of time.
In fact, I'm curious, as a broadcaster, I had to learn a very long time ago, you know, in Ventrilo and in TeamSpeak and in Skype to allot and to get ahead and to jump, you know, with the conversations. And I'm sure that anyone who's ever done broadcasting gets used to that. My question is, what's the magic number that a normal person would get used to without freaking out? And then is that number different for broadcasters?
Phone is about 200 milliseconds. When you're talking to someone on the phone, you're off by 150, 200 milliseconds, you know, and we see it different though when we do the switch. The switch is 50 milliseconds and you immediately feel a tighter conversation. Jeff?
Yeah, I think that unnatural timing plays out both between the people having the conversation and those watching it as like something is wrong. There's deception, or someone has to think too much about it, and then they're crafting maybe something. So I think that unnatural timing gives us the impression of bad things, and that's part of why it like feels so wrong in conversation, and it stops you becoming close and intimate and actually having good, honest conversation. Not saying that people are being deceptive, but just the timing causes that feeling that's how we perceive it as humans.
Right. Next question.
Next comes up from Ricardo Hicks of Raleigh, North Carolina, who says, having so many layering options with Vmix makes it difficult to move to a hardware switcher, but it's time, as I need more ISO inputs and I'm tired of capture cards and dongles. Any suggestions from the group on their favorite switcher for 6 or more SDI HDMI inputs? And he notes the switcher will need to make it back into Vmix at another part of his workflow.
Go ahead, Stuart, and then Jason, and we'll move on. Make it quick.
I would actually suggest sticking with Vmix and getting a better type of SDI card, one that has an external breakout box that sits in a rack mount. So the entire system is rack mounted, and then you're plugging into proper full-size connections. The Kona that I just purchased has got the same sort of thing. I believe Blackmagic also has some.
Go ahead, Jason.
I'm sure that Stuart's answer is an excellent one, but I'll answer the question exactly as asked. The ATEM Television Studio Pro 4K is a $3,000 unit. It's all SDI, and it's absolutely beautiful.
Whether you're going out of breakout boxes or not, just remember that we do a lot of convenience panels. So we don't ever plug into our hardware very often. We push almost all of that out to a convenience panel, which is a standard SDI, and you can do that with capture cards. You can do it with everything else. And what it does is it really lengthens the lifetime of your equipment because you're not constantly whacking on those things. You're whacking on things that are $16 instead of $16,000. Next question.
Panelist Dave Node is sitting up there, says, out of Charlotte, North Carolina, is there a workflow you would consider where you bring in a bunch of panelists via individuals' Facebook portals versus computers and taking the HDMI outputs into a switcher to switch a show?
Go ahead, Mickey.
I believe Chris Fenwick is working on getting a system like that running. So it should be fairly you should be able to do that.
I mean, we're using Dells at the moment, lots of them, and we're probably going to move. The next generation will probably be Mac Minis just because they work really, really well and they're a lot smaller and less expensive. Sky and then Guy, real quick.
The unusual thing with the Facebook portals is the AI does all of the camera movement for you. So all of a sudden you'll get zooming issues that you may like or you may not.
Right. Good Guy.
Yeah, you could put those into manual mode, Sky, so that it locks on. But I've been forcing myself to take some of these calls in the kitchen and just get a feel for how it looks and how it feels. but I just bought 2 more of them, and I'm going to line them up like that and just have them for simple remote stations where I can send them out and the person just plugs it in, or I send it with the Wi-Fi and they open it, plug it in, and it's ready to go. So we'll see. I'll keep planning.
You send hotspots?
And
I'm thinking about it. If that's the way. If that's
wow.
Yeah, go ahead.
We put we were getting the Meraki Z3Cs and then putting SIM cards in them. That's a whole router with a that ties into the mothership and but also uses cellular. We're going to keep going. Next question. We're going to run hot. I'm going to acknowledge that we're running heavy because we have a couple more questions, but we're going to go really fast. Next question.
Moving on to TJ Asher of Minneapolis. My grandson uses Reaper DAW. Recommendations on a new computer to be able to run the Reaper well. Is Windows or Mac OS better for Reaper? The budget is sub $1,500. And note he's a guitar player and wants to use it to record his guitar.
He just needs to know not to fear the Reaper. Go ahead, Brian.
What?
Go ahead, Brian.
Sorry, I wasn't sure that you called my name. Reaper is extremely efficient with power. You'd be amazed what you don't need to run a tremendous amount of stuff on Reaper. I've been using Reaper for a very long time, and quite often I take my oldest, slowest computer and put Reaper on it and run 150 tracks with 4,700 plugins, and it works just fine. I use it with a Mac all the time, but it apparently works just fine with Windows as well.
Go ahead, Jason, real quick.
I'd say the best answer is what is the best computer that you can run the least amount on, because I completely agree with Brian. It is an incredibly efficient architecture. So yeah, as long as you can close all the background tasks, 16 gigs, multi-core, and an SSD, and you're good to go.
Next question.
James Babbitt here in San Diego. Hi, Alex. Please explain the reference to Krupp's arms that you made earlier.
Just read the book. There's a book called The Arms of Krupp's. They basically they owned everything from the mining that got the raw minerals to the finished guns, and they supplied Europe, all of Europe, all the time, and they were playing for everybody's side, and it was the definition of a vertical, vertical integration. So next question.
We're moving to Alton Christensen's question out of Brooklyn, and Alton says, I can confirm issues with Zoom virtual camera input, black-gray video input using an Ultra Studio 3G on Mojave and latest Zoom. When I report it, I might make some mention of office hours in the support request, which might bump it up into the Zoom's to-do list. Is there a code word we should use?
I don't think we get any. I don't think us mentioning to the text folks, they're not going to know what that means.
Tell them Mr. Kilparney sent you.
We do know. I think there's a lot of people at Zoom that know that there's a gray issue. I'm going to be willing to guess that there's someone looking at it right now. If it's not fixed, I think, and we do know that we know the way to fix it is to turn it off and turn it on again. But obviously there's a bug somewhere in Zoom, and we're pretty clear that it's not an OS issue because it's happening across lots of OS and lots of hardware. It's just Zoom, and we think it's a security issue specifically with the Mac. We don't think it happens on PCs. So I think we have some pretty clear ideas of it, and I'm pretty sure that there's a bunch of people at Zoom that know that it's there. Next question.
Keenan Campbell of Princeton, Illinois says, Mukana seems to work really well. Is this a commercial product or a service we can purchase and use for our events?
You can contact me offline. We're close. We just don't have a lot of administration tools. It works as a unit. It's the other pieces of it that we're trying to finish up. And so hopefully we keep on thinking it's going to be this month, but we're working on getting that tied up just so you can actually run your event on it. But we're very close to it. You can contact me about it in Discord. Next question.
Christian Pelving of Uppsala says, what about Microsoft Teams? Is Zoom so way ahead that Teams will never catch up? Or are there strengths that Microsoft has with Teams meetings and, for example, the Teams live events?
Go ahead, Jason.
I wouldn't profess to predict the future, but I would say for the foreseeable future, Microsoft is way behind, and that has more to do with the institution than with the product.
I think the problem that Microsoft, the reason I won't use Teams is because of Skype. They've ruined Skype, just trashed it. And it's just the fact that I invested a lot in it, and then it had it really screw me badly. I am not interested in Teams. Like I just won't play. Like I'm just like not interested because I'm just like, that's going to be another thing where I start getting updates where people aren't paying attention to how their updates affect the end user. And I think the problem is for Zoom, this is their entire focus. Like this is all they're working on. This is what the company does. For Microsoft, you know, Teams is a important but very small part of the company, you know, and so there's just a different level of focus and resources that are going to go into when it's your whole company versus when it's just a segment of what you do. That I just don't. I think I will not say that they can never catch up. I think it's improbable that they'll catch up to Zoom, but they could. And I don't think anybody else can. Like I think it is as close to a 2-horse race. I would say that they're like 10 lengths back, and everyone else is like 50 lengths back. But I think that that's so I think that they're in the ballpark. You know, we'll move on to the next question. Sorry.
Moving on to another TJ Asher question out of Minneapolis. Does anyone else have a problem with the Amazon Prime Video app AV Sync on an Apple TV 4K? Mine is always 100 milliseconds off. No other streaming app has sync issues. It drives me crazy. Any ideas why this happens?
Go ahead, Jason. And then Scott.
I would say you either need to use or completely destroy your wireless sync, that thing you do with your phone where sometimes it'll get it right and sometimes it won't. I'd say that's your best bet.
Yep. What he said.
Next question.
And the last one in the pre-show group, C. Nichols, or the main show group, Alex, and so forth. What do you think of Leo Laporte's recent rollout of OBS Ninja to replace Skype?
I think he's still experimenting with it, given that I looked at Twit last night and it was still Skype. so I don't think it's completely over there. I think that of all the people that could switch over to OBS Ninja, it'd be Leo, because he's got lots of tech people that are connecting, so they can go through the trouble of going through the browser and setting up the camera and setting up the, you know, they'll go through that. The reason we don't use those WebRTC solutions is because I have to work with a lot of consumers or less techie folks, and explaining what I have to do to get what I need out of their browser is not something we went down the path of looking at doing it with Vmix and just decided that was going to be too much work, like too much support work to do it. So if someone builds a dedicated client that can do that for people, or in perfect world, let us do it for them, then we'd be interested. All right. I think we've gotten to the end of our little our open session. Sorry, it ran a little over, but we're now jumping into HDR. And I think that, you know, Scott and I were talking about it. We were talking about it on another show and a little bit. And I thought, you know, probably be good to drag Scott in and for us to talk about it, especially while we have Scott, because Scott's between jobs. So only for a week.
I haven't been unemployed in 32 years. I know it's only for a week, but it just feels odd.
Yeah. So Scott, so we have Scott for you can't say where you're going, but you can say where you came from, right?
Yeah, I was principal architect of video originally for Time Warner Cable, and then for Charter Communications. I was the guy doing information theory and video theory for them, and I was principal architect of HDR and chair of Working Group 1 for video for cable for the last few years. And I was the chair of the working group that did high dynamic range. Spent a lot of time with the BBC and with NBC and with Sky and BT. The guys were actually doing HDR for real. I know the guys at Apple. I know the guys over at various places. So yeah, HDR is only a little bit close to my heart.
So what do you think, Scott, before we get into the questions, what do you think are the important things for people to know about HDR?
HDR is many different things. When we talk about high dynamic range, which is what HDR stands for, it's amazing. We say HDR and we think everybody knows it means high dynamic range. It's not just that it's brighter. A lot of people get really confused that it's like, hey, I get brighter pictures. Yeah, you're right. You have way more brightness. Legacy television was really officially limited to what's called 100 nits. And a nit is just a value of luminance. It's like 100 candles per meter. And the reference monitors out there were supposed to be 100 candles per meter. That's your old television tubes. Your regular LCD monitors that you were buying for the last 10 years before we start getting to the really nice monitors we're getting today were about 300 nits. So even your regular TVs that you're buying were brighter than reference. A lot of TVs that you have today that you're getting that are HDR ready or HDR like are up to the 600 or 700 nit range. I happen to be sitting in front of a very, very nice Sony OLED. It isn't actually one of the brighter HDR ones. OLEDs tend to be not as bright, but they have much finer contrast levels in darks. It only does about 600 nits at max, but it's made for a dark room. It's really a movie monitor. I've seen 10,000 nits. I can get a very, very nice tan from a 10,000 nit TV.
I can't even imagine 10,000. I've seen a 4,000 nit, and what I found was interesting is they popped open a desert scene, and my pupils went whoop. You know, the whole, and I thought that was just I hadn't had that with a TV, where suddenly it was getting to the point where it felt like daylight.
So, well, we can talk about that. The 10,000 nit was actually on the floor at CES a couple of years ago. Sony put it out there. It was a 4K monitor, 10,000 nit. I had the chance to talk with the guy who built it. It was physically warm.
Yeah.
They had multiple power supplies going back. It was crazy.
Well, even on the, I have a Sony. Well, I've been using a Sony reference, HDR reference. The 300, I think, and. And what's funny is when you go into HDR mode on it, you hear the fans like, woo, oh, now we're serious, like we're not messing around anymore. Yeah.
So most of the TVs you're seeing today for HDR actually are physically brighter. That's not the really interesting thing to me about high dynamic range. High dynamic range also has finer grained amounts of contrast. So in the past, you had these you had fairly decent steps of contrast, but they're 8-bit steps up to a certain number of steps. Now you have 1,000 steps of contrast. And depending whether you're talking HLG versus PQ, which are the different versions of HDR, EOTFs with the electro-optical transform format, they have slightly different curves, etc., but you have much finer grained steps. So you get much closer steps of contrast. And that to me is much.
And when you want to think about that, think about like when you do a gradient in Photoshop, and it's a not very much of a change in the gradient. You'll see these steps that go down. That's the banding is what we usually, So banding in that area that's because I only have, especially if I'm going from let's say in the red channel, I'm only going from 200 to 220, but I got to cover more pixels than that. That I could change one brightness for every pixel. If I get more than that, I start banding, right? And so by having 10-bit or 12-bit, we have more steps to get from one to the other.
Right. And in professional, typically 12-bit, your TV is going to be 10-bit. Yes, Jason, you got a question?
Well, more of a statement, just the way that I've described this in the past is a lot of the time with standard broadcast TV, when you say contrast, you mean only mid-tone contrast, whereas with HDR, you really can tweak it in a way that is both in low end and in high end very much more even. Instead of just saying, oh, it's brighter. Well, that's true, but the contrast is the real difference, and it's throughout the entire spectrum.
Right.
Or detail. I guess I wouldn't say contrast, but detail.
Yeah, but also that changes depends on whether you're in HLG or PQ. HLG, hybrid log gamma, they use the traditional gamma curve to a certain place, and then they stretch it out. So it looks like legacy television to a certain place. PQ has a slightly different curve, so you get different functions. Hollywood, very much.
Can you define that a little bit? Can you define HLG versus PQ a little bit?
Sure. HLG is hybrid log gamma. They took the legacy gamma curve, the 2.4 multiplier to match the human visual system. There we go. Jason's already got it up for us. That matches the response curve of the human visual system, dark to light, multiply it out because we see much more contrast at lower range than we do at higher range, multiplied that out, and then they got to a certain place and they bent the curve to give themselves more range.
Right. PQ, and in many ways, HLG was a little bit of it's a gap measure, right? We've got a bunch of people with old TVs that have SDR. We don't want to make them get something new. They should be able to watch that signal and have it just work, right?
And there was a desire to do backwards compatibility, whereas PQ, much more coming out of Dolby, frankly, was much more like, hey, look, here's where we could do some really crazy things. And they were thinking originally about like, let's do 10,000 nits. Let's do crazy bright things. HLG does not define how bright you can get. A lot of people talk about HLG only within 1,000 nits, so not crazy bright. To be fair to all the HLG community, there's no definition of how bright you should do HLG. There's sort of convention about doing it 1,000. That's not a definition. That's kind of where people have gotten to. But really, HLG was seen as an interim step until we could do PQ correctly. PQ has a much more long-term gradient, but really, most people still, Jason, as he said a minute ago, kind of let themselves play around with the midtones a little bit and then gave themselves much more interesting specular highlights that go beyond 1,000 nits to make it more interesting. Where it gets really into religion in that world is HLG is scene reference. The idea is HLG, that's what the camera saw. PQ is screen reference. This is what the colorist or your shader saw. And this is the whole religious argument between PQ and HLG. HLG says, hey, that's what I shot. PQ is that's what the producer of the content says you should see. And
then you take one more step past that and you get into Dolby Vision where because PQ is going to set that metadata of what per show, right? I mean, like the entire event has a certain set of metadata there, whereas Dolby Vision can do it at every frame. It doesn't do it at every frame; it does every scene typically, but it can do every. I mean, it does. It's not, the scene is usually what it's changing, but it can change every frame.
Well, remember, I'm a live guy, and I'm a big believer in Dolby Vision Live. I'm actually, my last thing I did before I left was actually experiment in 4K Dolby Vision Live, and it looks pretty spectacular. Yes,
but you're not passing Dolby Vision down the live pipe. So,
yes, you are. You can. You absolutely can.
And how are you managing the metadata for that?
You're inserting it at the encoder at the last stage.
Right. But you're not. But are you passing the metadata through the SDI chain?
No, you're actually having. There's actually a tool. Hang on, I'm just making sure I'm not breaking any NDAs. No, I'm not. It's fine. It's public. Apple's doing Dolby Vision 8.4, so I can talk about 8.1. You're actually taking a signal in, whether it's shot in HLG or in HDR10, either way. Not a lot of HDR10 is being shot. Most stuff shot live is done in HLG. The input comes to the encoder. The encoder looks at it. There's a tool from Dolby that reads that, converts it to PQ, and applies Dolby Vision metadata to give you a Dolby Vision Live experience that tells the TV downstream, hey, look, here's your reference, here's your shading, here's your colors, here's your color anchors, here's everything you need to do to give you a Dolby Vision Live experience on a Dolby Vision TV.
And the big advantage is that you do that once. You're not like with you do that once and all that metadata is there. If you get a better TV, it just keeps going, right?
And the nice thing is what Dolby has done now with the latest systems. In the older versions of Dolby Vision, and you have to remember, there's many Dolby Visions. They did a 2-layer system originally that kind of didn't go anywhere. What Apple and Netflix do on their system is called System 5. That has very private bindings, and we could get down to the bottom fact that all the metadata is in the NAL units inside the encoding. It's not very backwards compatible. It's very locked. It has to be done very specifically in very specific ways. What they've done now in Dolby Vision 8.1 is if you've got a Dolby Vision TV and you've got a Dolby Vision decoder and they're locked together and they've got the right signaling, hey, great, you get Dolby Vision. But if somewhere in that system you've got an HDR10 Roku tied to a Dolby Vision TV, well, that's not going to work. You get HDR10 because it drops some of the metadata. You still get a great experience, not as good. But if you have a fully Dolby Vision compliant system, it works all the way through.
Right.
Where this gets really bad, and I understand a little bit now from a conversation I just had last week with somebody after I complained on something on Twitter, is our friends at Apple are doing Dolby Vision 8.4 on the phone, which is HLG with Dolby Vision metadata. And that seems kind of crazy to me because it's using a different EOTF than what's being done in
Can
the
you
TVs.
explain EOTF?
Electrical optical transform. It tells you what curve to use to generate the actual contrast.
Right.
The actual contrast for the images, right? The problem is you're shooting on your camera. You are shooting this and you say, I saw this, I want to see it here. Most people are not colorists. Most people are not shaders. They're going, I shot it, I want to see what I saw, what I shot there. Most people are not going to be able to go, okay, now I'm going to take this, I'm going to run it through Davinci, or I'm going to run it through Final Cut and go, I'm going to create a final resolution that I'm going to put out to a TV that looks great. This is a bit of a problem because there isn't a tool chain right now that's going to allow us easily to go, I'm going to take what I shot on my phone and put it on my TV and have it look right. There's going to need to be a tool chain out there. I'm kind of curious to see what comes out from that.
My thing is that I just wish that you could have a Dolby Vision setting in your TV that just said, I'm going to ignore all the other things in this TV, all the brightness and vivid and color and everything else. I'm going to have and I have, let's say, a light sensor somewhere in the top of the TV, and I'm just going to make a bunch of decisions for you. And it's all going to be, and then I get accurate pixels. Because right now the goal between HDR is that for all the HDR, whether it's HDR 10 or Dolby Vision or whatever, is that the viewer seeing the artistic intent, right? And the problem with that is that even when I set up a LG OLED, consumer monitor, but still $2,500, $3,000 monitor, I have to go in and change all these settings to get anywhere near an accurate number. And I felt like that was the dream that we were hoping to get to, is I didn't have to do that anymore. Like it just turned on and it did Dolby Vision or did HDR 10 or whatever it was to do that.
There's a group of people working on that. There's a group of people called the UHD Alliance who are working on exactly that. Right. They want the signaling to come from whoever created the content to go, hey, TV, I'm this.
Right.
Do your right setting. Set up your frame rate.
In the same way that Atmos does that, because Atmos, you put out a sensor and it goes, I play all the stuff out of the speakers and I figure out what your room is. And then it was really funny. I was talking to I'm going to bring him on. He said he'd come on. I'm not going to name him right now, but I was one of the top surround, the mixers in the world. And anyway, but he was talking about the fact that he can listen to a movie and know how big your room, he can tell that you mixed it in the Atmos in a big room or a small room, because the big room has all these subtleties to it that he's mixing. His room is 55 feet or 56 feet wide and 40 feet wide, and there's like 80 speakers, but he can hear things.
Is his name Sean by any chance?
No, not Sean.
Oh, okay,
but I'm sure that Sean knows him. So anyway, that's a very small. There's a very small number of people that have a studio like that. So there's like 10 of them that do most of the stuff. And so, but anyway, that's a kind of an interesting. Go ahead, Jason.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to mess with your flow. That 2020 Sony that I was just mentioning that is brand new had this feature that I'd never seen before called like Netflix Experience or something along those lines, and it locks down all of the settings, absolutely everything, and the color looks better than it does on the Apple TV 4K with a perfectly calibrated. It's the same monitor, but it looks much better
because it took away all the things. It took away all the things. It just said, because the average consumer doesn't need to know all those things either. And Netflix is the master. I will say what Netflix has done for us across all production is standardization. Like it is just like, because you get a paper from Netflix that says, this is how you will shoot, this is how you will create it. And this is how your sound will go. And it standardized the entire industry has standardized around Netflix. I mean, I don't know, Mickey, would you agree that like what everybody does now is Netflix standards?
They're very specific specs that you have to follow. And it's interesting as well. Like this is kind of a tangent, but they went back to the old way of measuring loudness, which is more very like speech based, as opposed to now it's overall show like content, not specific to speech.
That's great. Kev.
Yeah, the thing you were talking about is actually described as filmmaker mode, which is the description, and that's the business that the UHA allows us to do. So if you Google that, there's loads of stuff about it.
And that's where I honestly think Kev, that's where we need to go.
Yep.
Until I just left my other job, I was on the committee for that. What's really funny is all the major TV makers are on that committee. They're all signed up to it. And the lead for one of that committee that actually signed up for all that specification is actually the lead technical guy for the one TV maker that didn't sign up for signing up for the rules. So it's funny. 3 of the 4 signed up for it. The 4th, who is actually the lead of the committee, didn't sign up for it. What we're running into is they want to have product differentiation. And one of the things that Alex and I were bickering about, for lack of a better term, on the conversation we're having is one of the reasons why I love Dolby Vision, and one of the reasons why I think it will eventually win, is it kind of takes away some of the problems we have with what the image looks like. Dolby Vision tends to regularize the image. I have a very expensive TV in front of me, and then I have a fairly crappy TV over here, but they both have Dolby Vision. If I put Dolby Vision to it, it will make it look pretty similar. And you can tell that this is a better panel than that one over there, but they look fairly similar. If I run HDR10 to it, yeah, this one looks significantly better. That one looks significantly worse, but they don't look quite as the same. The metadata helps regularize the image. The other systems like HDR10 Plus, yeah, not so much. There are other dynamic metadata systems out there. They're simply not as good. And putting the Dolby Vision logo on it, frankly, Dolby Vision, as much as sometimes I do find Dolby to be, we've all dealt with Dolby as an audio company. They tend to be very, very pushy. Uh-oh, sorry.
I can't read it.
I can't read it.
We're going to.
Yeah. Dolby might be onerous to work with, but when Dolby puts their stamp on it, it bloody works.
Well, and I think that in general, I think that it's important for us. I think that the reason I wanted to talk about this is that I think next year is the year of HDR. Like a lot of us saw HDR demos, and you've been on these panels, and I've been on encoding groups and so on and so forth talking about HDR. And it wasn't until Apple dropped the bomb, of putting it on the camera. So that their devices for the last year or two have been able to display since 2019. Their devices have all been able to display HDR. You haven't been able to shoot HDR. And the distinction there is that now you have consumers that are shooting something that looks significantly better than what's on TV, and significantly better than what's online. And you notice it all as someone who's got shooting with a 12. It is kind of arresting, like you get used to it, and then you go back, and I find myself hitting brightness all the time and trying to figure out what's wrong with the image, and subconsciously it's bothering me all the time. And so I think that we're going to see that. And again, I do think that, Vision's going to do really well because Apple has, anointed it as the,
that frankly, Apple saying, hey, we're doing Dolby Vision.
Yeah.
I will tell you up front, the people who have really been pushing HLG as a standard in North America in a month have basically went, we're done. We give up. Dolby Vision.
Yeah. I always think of HLG as the scraps off of Longshank's table. Anyway,
there is one company, there's one major panel maker in the world that does not support Dolby Vision, and they've been very religiously not supporting it. We're getting a sense that they're starting to change their tune.
Yeah, they're going to have to. I've heard that there are issues delivering HDR using Adobe After Effects. Is it the same with Premiere? What are the solutions? We've had all kinds of problems with it, with After Effects and Premiere. It's just not built for it. You have to have a lot of tools that are built for that. I would say that Motion is actually really interesting because Motion exports the graphics. You just set it now to PQ, and we just did it for a whole show, and all those graphics come out perfectly. Like we didn't do anything to them in Resolve. We just played them. And so what I will say is if you're going to do HDR production right now, if it's fast and furious and it's relatively straightforward, Final Cut is good. If you're going to do real HDR production, I think that the only platform to use right now is Resolve. Go ahead, Scott.
I will tell you that when I actually did the Dodgers in HDR 2 years ago, I actually flew Andrew Cotton, the guy who wrote HLG, over from England to actually help me do my graphics.
Yeah.
Because he was the only guy in the world who went, no, this is how you do graphics. and we had a Royal Rumble with Sony and the guy from Technicolor because they didn't like it. But Andrew was right. The HLG guys actually know how to do graphics better than anybody else.
And we found that the tricky part is alpha channels. You know, it becomes a thing. You know, so alpha channels are the thing. You know, like that's the, and we're going to talk a lot more about HDR in this group. So I'm not going to get into alpha channels, but alpha channels are one of the harder things to do there. And so, but can be done. And again, I think that as a platform, this is where Resolve, because of its heritage, it just it just built for it because it understands all that stuff. Now, what I will say is that there's going to be a whole other discussion that we're going to do about Resolve, about dealing with your inputs and outputs and your gammas. And because there's 4 things: you have your input source, and you have your input gamma, you have your output source, your output gamma. You know, like there's a output destination, and there's these 4 things you have to figure out how they all interact with each other, you know, as you're building a kit. And if you don't have those tools, it's really hard to do HDR because you have to be able to define the cube of the transform of how things are getting from one to the other. Go ahead, Scott.
I will tell you one other crazy thing. There are different philosophies in the world of how to shoot HDR about how much gain offset people are used to put on their cameras. Of all things, and I'm sorry if this sounds a little inappropriate to say, because every time I say it, people look at me oddly. We have an HDR shooter in Spain who likes a very hot look, and he has a 5 dB gain on his cameras. He really loves it, and he doesn't tell anybody that. So whenever we get his footage in, we go, why does this stuff look so hot? And we have to actually tone it down. And we find that he loves a hot look. There is no standard methodology for passing camera gain right now for HDR. You actually have to have somebody phone you and go, oh, by the way, these are my camera settings.
Well, and we tend to we just tend to acquire everything in log, you know, and we're going to, you know, like it's not, you know, without, you know, and within a proper range. And then we're going to do whatever we're going to do, even in live.
So, but the problem is if you take a look at what's shot in a Sony camera, that's got a whole series of settings. If you take a look at Grass Valley, there are 7 or 8 different HDR modes now.
Yep.
I spoke with the guys from Avid last year about standardizing HDR settings, and the president from Avid went, every time he turns around, there's a new HDR option that he has to create because somebody has their HDR choice.
And again, it's why I'm going to spend a lot of time, especially in the spring, talking about HDR here, is because we need to understand it. This is not something that there is you just need to know how to flip this bit and turn this thing and then it's going to work. We're going to need to really make sure that everybody here really understands it, really understands how those function curves work and what they mean. And, you know, a lot of other things. We're going to bring on, you know, more people to talk about this. This is kind of our introductory.
And in all fairness, there's a whole bunch of papers, BT 2100, etc., that are free that talk about HDR. They are math heavy. They are theory heavy.
The goal that I have,
they're worth a read.
The goal that I have is a couple of us read those, and then we try to figure out ways to condense them so that everybody, until you're ready to read those things, we get everybody's head around it. That's what we're trying to do. Jeffrey Rays asks, Alex, with 3 competing HDR standards, HDR10 and proprietary Dolby Vision and HLG, how do you see things in the industry playing out? I guess we've kind of talked about this already. Of course, he asked this at 724. And do any have reservations about picking Dolby? I don't. This gets into that like horse picking thing. I don't think that there's going to be anything other than Vision in another 2 or 3 years, mostly because no one else has Apple PR behind it and it has the right quality. You know, the thing you always worry about is that the wrong one will win because the wrong one will win because of PR. But now what you have is I think the most advanced approach mixed with the right PR.
And if I can throw in, most people today, if they're shooting, they shoot in HLG. There's a few people shooting in PQ. They all derive intermediate products, but the final products that are being derived in Hollywood, they're all being derived in Dolby Vision.
Right.
And I can publicly say that cable has standardized primarily on Dolby Vision as a distribution format. Apple TV is primarily a Dolby Vision format. Roku supports Dolby Vision. You know, more and even though Amazon, you know, supported HDR10+, their latest products all support Dolby Vision. if you go to CES sometime, if we ever have CES again, that's not virtual, almost every TV maker out there supports Dolby Vision, one exception. We're going the right way. And Dolby itself built a product that says, look, we'll do Dolby Vision in this way. And if you don't support Dolby Vision, but you support HDR10, here's a format that supports it, which is kind of nirvana for me.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. James Babbitt asks, does HDR need more advanced cameras designed for HDR? Generally, I mean,
HLG. You need to shoot in HLG.
Well, for live, and even then, you could, depending on what you're doing, you can actually. The big thing is a camera capable of a log output can be, and lookup tables. So you can apply those lookup tables, to the cameras at that point. So at this point, the Blackmagic 4K and 6Ks are completely capable of that, just in case you're wondering. So you can definitely load your LUTs, into there. You can even pump log out of those cameras and do your transform inside of something like an FSHDR. And that way you're doing it to the whole show rather than to one camera at a time. So it depends on what you're doing and what your pipeline looks like. The biggest challenge really isn't the cameras. It's the interaction between the cameras and the playback. So the playback, you have ad agencies that are really particular about their colors and how all the stuff that Scott and I are talking about. What's holding up HDR in broadcast in many places that I've talked to folks is the actual interaction between the camera. The cameras are fine, the graphics are fine. The playback of the commercials is complicated because of how those get transformed and how they get through has been a real bugger. Stuart and then Jason.
Okay, it's time to throw the cat amongst the pigeons again. With James's question and with the question I posed that's further down the list. Are we effectively saying that linear cameras like this thing behind me or like the Sony F65 or like the linear output of an Arri Alexa can't play in HDR? Because I'm pretty sure everyone will tell you that an Alexa is a HDR camera.
Absolutely. Well, and I think the Alexa can
that's
still do
12 stops behind me too.
But I think that the Alexa can still output a log output, live. So a camera that can put out log just put out an unmapped can be transformed into an HDR camera. It doesn't have to have anything else internal to do that. Go ahead, Scott, and then Jason.
And pretty much and Stuart, anywhere where I have RoboCams or legacy cameras that are hard mounted that aren't ready to do HDR or even are like old 720p's, I've got toolkits nowadays that can take them in and do a LUT and multi-point LUT and upconvert and hardware, and I can get something that looks good enough for that camera to make it HDR compliant and 4K if I need to as well.
And we've done it with.
I should point out, Scott, in case you can't see it, that's an AJA Scion behind me.
That'll work. Good to go, baby.
We recently mapped a Blackmagic micro studio to and intercut with all of our HDR, the rest of the HDR show perfectly. And it took a lot for us to get everything to match up. But the 10-bit is more important. The 10-bit and 12-bit are more important than the linear or curve or the log curve, because you need to have those gradients, as Scott was talking about, to get from one color. That all we have to then figure out, again, when we're talking about, we'll talk more about this in the future. I'm going to get the guys from Lattice to come on and talk about cubes and everything else. But what is it? What's the name of the company? Film. Anyway, Video Village. Video Village. Anyway, so the Video Village makes the company called Lattice, which is makes the app called Lattice, which opens up your LUTs. Okay. You can open up your LUTs and look at the shape of your LUTs, which is super useful. Anyway, so but once you have 10 or 12-bit color, 10-bit minimum, 12-bit optimum, it's just saying I have an input and an export out, an input and an output function across this grid that's pulling those colors to where they need to be. And you can get 95% there with that. There are some issues with uncontrolled environments where you won't have the same, you won't have the same tops and bottoms, but you can definitely match those cameras up. And we were surprised at how close that camera got. In fact, there were shots where that camera looked at least as good as the other cameras. As we got it mapped in, it looked really good. It was like a close up of an instrument. Go ahead, Jason.
I mean, that's exactly the camera that I'm on now, the 4K version of the broadcast, whatever it's called, the tiny little studio. And yeah, getting 10-bit is a pain in the butt, but it really does look amazing when you map it correctly. I was thinking, you were talking about the ad agencies. If they are that picky about the playout, wouldn't they just provide some sort of LUT to standardize whatever their color output is?
Yeah, but it's what are the cameras set to? You know, like the whole thing is that they can provide all they want, but we still have to convert what they have into what we're doing. And so it is, I mean, just getting two clips to go together, you know, because this one had one gamma, this has another gamma, and getting those all to look good, and then getting them to look good so that the creators are happy with it. Whew, let me tell you, like it is a thing, because these are people who talk about, they talk about colors that I can't even see. You know, oh, that yellow has got a little too much cyan in it. I'm like, it's all yellow. You know, like it's, you know, I mean, I can see some of it, but ad agencies can be just, you know, and certain companies that are really particular can be really particular. And so getting that color just right, and them having control, and it is a matter of standardizing the functions, and it's, you know, we have to figure out, like, what we're working on right now is how do I take my live content and how do I build this overall function that my playback and the live is, I'm slaving the live to the playback, you know, so because it's easy for me to change you always end up adjusting for the lowest common denominator, or the thing you have the least control over. I don't have control over the playback stuff that comes to me, so I have to get it into a certain piece, and then I can make the cameras match that. You know, like, it's not, you know.
There's a really cool thing I saw from a company you named a while ago, where we took legacy content, Alex, and we might have just wrapped it in dynamic metadata.
Yep.
And it looked really spectacular. And we showed it to people and said, well, you reshot that. And we had to show them, no, we didn't. We just took your content. We didn't do anything. We just put it in dynamic metadata. And it looks better.
Yeah, and it's that bit depth is really important, and then also just figuring out that curve that gets from this to that, you know, is the thing that's really tricky. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yeah.
So we're saying that the bit depth is far more important than the dynamic range of the camera or the source material, then, just to get that understanding straight, because there are plenty of arguments about what cameras are
I would say
SDR, what is HDR according to the number of stops.
I would say it's more important.
Range.
So what I would say is it's more important. It's not vastly more, you know, like, it's not, you know, there, it's, you can get those cameras to go in, but they are limited. They are not, you know, if it's got limited dynamic range, you are not going to get the same detail in the shadows and the high tones as you will in a log function. You know, you're just not, it's not there. There's no there. If you are in a controlled environment where you don't have a ton of, like, I don't know if I could match my little micro in a football game outside, because I've got so much dynamic range that it has so much area that it has to cover, where I might lose a little bit of the sky, or I might lose a little bit. Now, I will say that we were shooting log with Sony F950s using what was called a Yedlin. Steve Yedlin had this, it was a Yed log that we would apply to the cameras. It was a LUT function. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about this. Anyway, I'll say it anyway. It's 10 years ago. There was Yed log that we put on our Sony F950s that would build a log function inside of a very old camera. The camera was built in 2002 or whatever, and we got a lot of sky data, and a lot of the data was there. It was just a matter of applying that function to it as it came in from the raw data. Go ahead, Raphael.
Well, the thing is that the information that you get from the bit depth is related to the entire chain. The sensor has a certain amount of requires a certain amount of photons to react for each pixel. So you have the minimal amount of photons that you need for the sensor to actually do something is your minimal value, and then you have the bit depth is the useful bit depth. If you have like a 16-bit encoder, it doesn't make sense if your error rate is above, say, a couple of bits out of that.
Right.
If you have a 16-bit encoder, but your actual usable range is like 12 bits because the rest of the stuff is just noise, it doesn't make any sense to have 16 bits.
Right. Yep.
So, and then it goes to the encoder, which will make log or whatever, and then to the recorder. But if you have too much noise in there, it doesn't make any sense.
Right. Absolutely. Scott?
Stuart, I'll break your brain a bit. So I was shooting 8K in London with a very, very nice Sony camera with a very, very nice lens in the at Stamford Bridge, watching Chelsea play Bayern Munich. And there was so much information coming out of that lens and out of that camera. I actually saw the player better on the TV screen than I did sitting in the stands. I could see stitching on the outfit, on the player's uniform, that I couldn't see sitting there. There's so much data coming there. So you had the incidence of a fantastic lens, fantastic lighting, fantastic sensor, fantastic, well, frankly, fantastic cameraman. The gentleman was French. I tried to talk to him. He didn't speak any English. We had to have a translator there. He was amazing. And then the shader was amazing. That was amazing. I want that. And it was in HDR too.
Well, and the big thing for me, I think you saw it probably at NAB a couple years ago, last NAB that was there. They had this huge LED wall that was 8K, 120 frame per second HDR. And when I saw it, I was like, that is the final, that's what we're going to get in our lifetime. Like in the next 10 years, we're going to be at 120 frame per second, 8K HDR, because my whole like body changed when I watched it. Like it was like, you could feel it. Like when they moved the cameras, it made it uncomfortable. It made it upsetting. You know, like it was, felt like I could feel the heat from it, you know.
We shot that the day after I was at Stamford Bridge. It's not 10 years from now.
Oh, I know. I'm being optimistic. So everyone, yeah. But I think that it's that stuff is the engine stuff and the drag racing and, you know, all the other stuff that's there as well is pretty impressive. Go ahead, Raphael, and then Stuart.
A few years ago, they had this big 8K prototype OLED thing in the Sony booth at IBC, and they had this loop, this video loop where they would show some Tokyo highway location or something, and you could actually read the plates on the cars from like, I don't know, 200 meters or something. The camera looked like it was incredible.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart. Oh, can't hear you.
I'll wait for Scott to answer.
Good, Scott.
The core thing there, Raphael, is the quality of the lenses that are coming out nowadays are letting us get the depth of field that we couldn't get several years ago. There's a great paper from a guy from Zeiss that has shown us that we've gained almost 2.5 f-stops in today's lenses that we didn't have a few years ago. So 8K cameras have existed for a while. We just haven't had the lenses. Now we have the lenses, and the lenses are crazy. So
some people
Alex,
have the lenses. Anyway, so just not
three guys have the lenses. Sorry. But Alex, your comment earlier on about how, you know, you're talking about, we had the conversation in the previous hour, buy versus rent. Buy the lens, buy the 8K lens.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'll jump to a couple more questions here real quick. James Babbitt says, does HDR improve the video on a small 32-inch TV, or is HDR noticeable only on a larger TV? I think this is actually one of the places where HDR becomes more important than your resolution. In fact, it's arguable that it's hard to see the difference between 4K and 8K on a 70-inch screen unless you're close enough to it. You know, like it's not, you know, like it's not a, you know, so the difference between 4K and 8K, or, you know, and you have to really, there's a lot of math there of what becomes retina, so to speak.
Yeah, there's,
you know, how close you have to sit.
Once you start getting into resolution issues, you have to move very close to something to actually start getting resolution difference. Once you get into mass resolutions, but for contrast and brightness levels, you get that almost irrespective of the distance, the size. Dolby did a great paper that shows that HDR on something this size is fabulous.
Oh yeah, no. So it doesn't. It's more important. HDR is definitely more important than resolution, especially on a 32-inch TV. Bobby Rafferty. Oh, go ahead.
Better pixels are more important than more pixels.
Yep, absolutely. Bobby Rafferty asks, HDR, can you explain Rec 2100 HLG and the other formats for HDR? We talked about it a little bit, but explain what's the difference between Rec 2100 and 2020?
Oh God. Okay, Rec 2020 is a bigger color space. Okay, so I'm gonna have to do this from memory, and I'm gonna probably get it wrong. So Rec 2020 is color space. Legacy television SD was originally Rec 609. That was a very small color space. Rec 709 opened it up a little bit more. Rec 2020 is a very, very large color space. It actually encompasses almost all natural colors and pretty much all synthetic colors that your human eye can see. It does not include some of the unnatural greens that we can synthesize, but they're pretty much non-existent in the human system. In nature, we can synthesize greens that you can't see, but frankly, we can't create them from the TV today anyways, and that has to do with the math of how colors are created from a tricolor synthesis. So if you want to get into that, there's lots of color theory we could talk about. Rec 2100 HLG, oh my gosh, if I recall correctly, is a 4K set that allows you to do HLG, but only in Rec 709 color space. So you're getting HLG, but you don't get the full color space, if I recall correctly. So it's Rec 709 color space with all the contrast, but not with all the color you could get in Rec 2120 BT 2022.
Yeah.
BT 22. Too many numbers today.
Yeah, 2020. Tucker Dragoo says, what stream encoders currently support HDR? To my knowledge, no, Elemental now does.
Sorry, at which price point, I guess, is my question.
No, yeah. Like, so
how much do you want to spend?
So I believe it's I can't know. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the other one. So there's two that do it. Elemental being the one public one. That build dropped a couple weeks ago, I think.
So at my point, I can buy from 8 companies that will stream video today in HDR, and Dolby has incorporated their
what are the other ones that do HDR? Are you allowed? Are they public or are they?
I worked with MediaKind. I've worked with ATEM. I've worked with Harmonic. I've worked with Elemental. The other ones are less public. I know that Bits. Oh shoot! I'm forgetting their names.
Yeah.
Them guys. Right. Those
Them
other guys.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So there's lots.
There's no small ones. There's no Wirecast version of this right now. Like this is a definitely when we're talking about encoding live, you're talking about, but you can definitely put BOD. You don't need to do that. I mean, compressor will do that for you. We'll compress it, but when you're talking about live encoding, you're talking about heavy iron right now. Although nowadays even the elementals are getting to, out of the stratosphere into the sub $10,000 range of a box that will support it. So something to think about. Scott's like, what? He's like, yeah. There's something.
They're way cheaper than that, Alex. You just have to spend lots of money.
Exactly. You can buy them in bulk. Jonas Dattel asks, best budget HDR monitor for a GH5. For example, an Atomos Shinobo 5-inch. So like a good HDR monitor for your GH5. I don't know enough about little monitors that do that. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I was thinking the Shinobi as well. So, and he mentioned that, but I'm a big fan of Small HD. Look at their Bright line. The line is called Bright.
And that's those are HDR monitors. Yep. Go ahead, Jason.
I would say Feel World, as long as you can correct it and calibrate it, you can load the light right in, and they're cheap.
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Atomos have claimed their monitors are HDR since the second generation of the Shogun. But like Mickey suggested, I would probably go with the Small HD one because Atomos don't finish the firmware for their products.
Ouch.
Rough. James Babbitt
Yeah, I'm sitting
says,
here next to a Shogun.
Yeah. James Babbitt says, does HDR deepen the black levels on an LCD TV, or to get deep black levels, does it require an OLED TV? Go ahead, Scott, and then Stuart.
To an extent, a little bit. It's much better on a OLED than it is on an LCD. Theoretically, it's better on an LCD, and I've seen LCDs where it's better, but an OLED is really where that's better. Go ahead, Stuart.
Go, Stuart.
The black level on an LCD is actually set by the backlighting and how the LCD actually does its twisting and untwisting. Where it appears to be darker is when you've got a higher nits monitor, so you're seeing the whites as a lot brighter and the blacks appear blacker. But if you turn off any picture information and just have a blank screen, for an LCD, it will always look slightly grey. It won't be the pure black of a CRT with the no signal off. It won't be the pure black of an OLED with the signal turned off.
Right. Jason?
Yeah, nothing beats OLED, period, no matter what you do. There are lots of little tricks that LCDs use, FALD, and extremely kind of like clever ways to tweak the backlighting. Scott is disagreeing with me. You know what? If you have an LCD that beats OLED, that doesn't have other issues with contrast, I'm all ears. It doesn't cost $100,000.
Oh, well, okay, sure, throw that in.
The one thing about OLED is, even though it's gotten a lot better, you do have to be conscious when you have an OLED burn in. It doesn't happen as much as it used to. It used to be minutes, like 15, 20 minutes, you could burn something in forever. Although most of these screens will reset. You can do a reset function that will kind of correct for that. But like, for instance, when we do tests, we run time code with like this is stream, primary, this is stream backup with resolutions and everything else. We throw those into our elementals to make sure we know what we're looking at, so we can see the ladder jumping up and down in Akamai or whatever. We have to be very careful of leaving those up, because those will run for days. We can't let our OLED be on. Like, we won't turn it on to watch that stream, because we know that if we let it go for all night, that little bar will be there forever. So you just have to kind of be careful. If you get OLED, with great power comes great responsibility. Roscoe Jones asks, with filmmaker mode, is judder still an issue with high nits, or do we no longer need higher frame rates to reduce HDR judder?
The point of filmmaker mode is actually to do it at 24 frames per second. So judder kind of goes away. So one of the things to keep in mind with, we're going to get into psychovisual stuff, so forgive me. The whole reason why 24 frames per second works in a theater is because you're in a dark room, and your brain actually goes into a physiologically different mode. Your brain slows down and your visual system processes slower. Your brain works slower, the film rate is slower, you naturally blur stuff, and it works great, and it's an awesome experience. And that's why filmmaker mode should work. Ideally, you're watching the film at 24 frames per second in a slightly dark room, you get the same experience. What I've seen when we watch high frame rate in a very bright room at certain frame rates, it's fine. In 60 frame rates per second, it's fine. I will tell you, testing in Europe with my friends at Liberty Global, 50 frames per second is garbage. You see judder irrespective of how bright it is. And that has to do with how these things work and how this thing works. 60 frames per second is really bad. 100 frames per second, 120 frames per second is great. 240 frames per second is amazing.
There we go.
We're a ways away from that.
One of the things I like about the idea of shooting a lot, I've been experimenting with shooting 120 frames per second. I'm not just starting the tests of it, but one of the things that's really interesting is 120 frames is an integer, multiplier of 60, 30, and 24. And you can use interpolation to get the motion blur back out into those. And so I feel like there's a point where we start shooting 120 frame all the time, and you want to go, the broadcast version is 60 or 30, but the film version is 24, and you could actually do that and have different sources. and they would all look correct, in that, and you're not making up new frames for any of it. So it's an interesting format there.
And there's there's really nice math, and there's really nice processing. And some people are just saying, oh, we just drop every other frame. No. There's really nice processing that lets you get there.
You have to interpolate those frames. And it's one of the things we learned with live is that when we used to do 720/30 from a 10, well, we do 720/60 is what the whole system ran at. But we were streaming at 30. We would open our shutters to 360 or to and we would, because then what came out the stream was proper, because that's why a lot of people's streams look a little stuttery. Because they're the live streams look stuttery because of that shutter speed. It's because you're getting basically the 90-degree shutter that you saw in World War II films. That's what you're getting when you throw out half the frames.
So Alex, I got to tell you, this is the biggest thing I'm running into in my industry, that there's all these software people doing all this streaming and they don't understand the basic physics of shooting.
Right.
Anyways.
Yeah, and we didn't do it at first. I just kept on noticing that there was stuttering, and then it was like a day in the lab trying to figure it out, and then I realized, oh, I didn't think of that, and then we put it in, and it was fine. But of course, back before office hours, we didn't tell anyone that we did it, so ours just naturally looked better, and we wouldn't tell anyone. It was like one of the Pixel Core secrets is to open up the shutters, and so our shows all look better than everybody else's, and people couldn't quite figure out why, but now we tell everybody.
Well done.
So.
Well done.
Stuart Fairweather said, for really surprising dynamics, has anyone seen the Earth at Night? Is this the new Apple Earth at Night?
Oh, yeah. Earth at Night in color is unbelievable.
Is it in 4K?
I think so.
No, it's not, because it was shot on Canon cameras that are only capable of 1080i.
And 1080p. No, they'll do 1080p.
Yeah, the Canon 2.2 megapixel things. You only see one shot of them, and it's in the making of on the last episode.
So when I saw it, when I saw the demo, I was like, there is no way that's going to be in 4K unless they upres it, because I know there's only one camera out there that can do that, which is the ME20, which is because I've used it. So we used to own 5 ME200s, which were our they're a Super 35 version of that, and it's 1080p only, because what they did is the ME200 is a Super 35 sensor. The ME20 is a full frame sensor, but they gave all those photo sites to 1080p. So what it does is
$250,000 ISO,
for the
right?
ME,
it's 4 million.
ME20
4 million
says
ISO on the
Super 35.
Well, the 1080,
You might have the numbers backwards.
Yeah, the ME200. No, I'm pretty sure I don't. So the ME200 is Super 35, I believe, and the ME20 is full frame. Almost positive, because the difference in price is 4 times. Like the ME200, which is the one I owned, is $5,000 a unit, and the ME220 is $20,000 a unit. But we did these, and you can shoot footage that you can't see. It is the craziest camera. You can literally be shooting footage and you can't see what's in front of you, and you have to look at the viewfinder of the camera to see what, and we were doing one where I was on the tail end of it. In this case, I wasn't shooting with it, but there were hyenas in front of the person. I was like, I wonder if they know how close those hyenas are to them. I was like, I'm just curious. I hope they're looking through the viewfinder to know that their angle of incidence is getting, anyway. So, I'm really looking forward to seeing that. I was wondering if they had come up with a new camera, but it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like they stuck with the, again, other than it's got the best low light performance, other than some, not military, but like the I think it's the X21, is a more military, leaning camera, and it will do about the same as the Canon or a little bit better in color. But it doesn't look as nice. It just doesn't, and it's built, it's built for surveillance, not for filmmakers. So anyway, the Stuart says lenses. We've talked about that lens, looking at the model on the shelf behind Scott on past shows, and it just touched on light transmission through lenses. Are medium format lenses capable of HDR capture? I would think so.
Yes-ish.
Yes, I noticed it's Apollo module.
Yeah.
A lunar module sitting there. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I'm old enough to remember it landing, so my boys gave it to me. Yes, they are. It will depend on how much light there is in what you're shooting. HDR really needs lots of light until you get into higher quality lenses. The original shooting that we did at Liverpool, we ran into kind of a dusky, dark day, and it didn't go well because we didn't have great lenses. 2 years later, much better lenses, same sort of day, no problem.
Scott, thanks for jumping on and helping anchor the conversation. It was good.
It's nice to finally actually have something useful to talk about. When you guys start talking about comms, I feel so stupid.
I knew that Scott was like when I saw your post on, I think it was LinkedIn or whatever, I was like, oh, we got to pull Scott on to talk about something before he goes back into a data hole. So.
What's funny, while we've been talking here, my new boss is like, I've got a question for you about passing TISO data inside a non-structured stream and being able to stream it across and do this and that. And so I know what I'm doing the rest of the day. I'm passing timing data to an ID3 tag in a dash stream. I have no idea how to do it. I have no idea how to do it, but I need to know by the end of the day. So
have fun with that.
Well, yeah, that's production. That's when you get into it. That's when you get into the interesting stuff, is where you don't know. You just got to figure it out. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, this is the crazy thing about this industry. You think about all the different parts of production and stuff we do, and reinventing stuff we already know how to do is not. It's great. It pays the bills, and that's nice. When somebody goes, "I have no idea how to do this," that's when this stuff gets fun.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks, Scott. Thanks so much. Hopefully we'll see more of you this week until you have to disappear again.
Well, you'll see me at least once because my mini shows up Thursday, so you'll see me at least Friday.
Okay, perfect. That sounds great.
I got to check to see if it works.
Right. And thanks everybody else here for being part of a great conversation. It's been great to have you. The whole thing gets made by the attendees, by what you ask, and then the discussion with the panelists. And so we can't do this show without all of you. And it's kind of, I think, the only show like that I know of that you can't, like, literally can't do it without everybody involved. So anyway, so thank you all for being part of this little experiment. And tomorrow we'll be talking about mixers. So completely shift gears from HDR to audio mixers, and we'll be talking about what they do and how they work, and hopefully our in-house experts will be here. And I know at least one will, because I think Mickey's probably going to be here. But hopefully we'll get Brian and Jeff and some of the other folks that talk a lot about that to be here. So anyway, take care. Have a great day, great evening, great morning, wherever you're at. And I'll see you